function is to write a charter describing the form of government that we think would be best suited for Charles County. Our guest tonight is Murray Levy. He is here to educate us and give us his opinions. Murray was, I believe, the Director of Finance first.
1971.
Okay, 1971. He was a county commissioner when there were 3 county commissioners. Then he was a county commissioner when there were 5. And he was president of the county commission when there were 5. He's been a delegate in Annapolis.
Sounds like I can't keep a job.
And he's been a businessman on the side as well. I had the privilege of working with Murray for a couple of those decades, and I do mean it was a privilege. I didn't always agree with him, but his positions were always well thought out. What we're trying to do now is educate ourselves, so we may, when you give us your positions, we may want to tease out what the arguments are for your positions and how you can respond to the arguments that we've heard the other way. We've all taken a pledge. Pledge might be too strong a word, but we've all agreed that we're not going to lock into any hard and fast positions until we've absorbed as much information as we can. Okay? And I am going to provide you also with just some of the questions. No, I won't provide it to you. Well, I will. These were just discussion questions that we've had, issues that we've talked about over the weeks, including last week. And someone, if you don't touch on them, I'm sure someone here will bring it up one way or another. And I'll start by just asking you generally to tell us if you think there are ways that the county government, the form of the county government, can be improved, and what suggestions you would have.
All right. Fair enough. I mean, that's what you're here, and I congratulate you for waiting until you hear all the arguments and give it some thought, because it's a very complicated question. And I think it's safe to say that for the last 250 years, our country has never quite settled on that question about what's the right way to organize itself, and it's been changing. And I would suggest that that's probably going to be the case here. Your first effort will be that, and then over time, people will work through the system. I want to differentiate between the structure of the government and the people that are elected. For some reason in local government, there seems to be a feeling that when things go badly, we should change the system. And as opposed to, like the federal government, if things are going bad, we change the president or the congressman or the senators, we change the people in it. And so I want to caution that there's no easy way to good government with the form of government. It still relies on good people. I do think the form is important. I think that there are benefits and drawbacks to the commissioner form of government. The benefit of a commissioner form of government is that it can be incredibly fast on its feet if you have a group of people that work together. Doesn't mean you agree all the time, but it means you come to agreements and votes on all the issues in a fair, open, and speedy fashion. So when something happens that you really must take care of, with 5 people, you can quickly get the information, make a decision, and move on. But it takes a lot of trust between the elected officials. And as you might know, elected officials are a very rare breed of person. We sometimes, I know this is going to shock you, that we worry more about our election than we do about the government, especially when election year turns around. And I used to warn the staff that during the election year, do not expect rationality, truth, or honesty from elected officials. We're busy trying to get reelected. And I don't mean that as a criticism. Elections are the engine of a democracy. You cannot have a democracy without elections. It always amazes me how much our citizens hate it and how much our elected officials hate it. But without an election, and a fair election, we don't have democracy. So what I would say to you today is I think that Charles County is growing large enough that separating the executive and the legislative branch may make sense. And that's essentially what it will do. You will have a county executive and a legislative branch. And the theory behind this is that when, no matter how bitterly they disagree on the policies, the functioning of the nuts and bolts of county government will not slow down because the elected officials can't come to terms with large policies. So if you need a building permit, you can get a building permit. If the cops need equipment, you see that the budget is amended and these things are done. That schools are not over capacity and all these other things. When you get to the policy issues about taxes and growth and land use, those become policy issues, and they're going to be subject to great debate and great disagreement. But the benefit is that if you have a county executive, they will keep the government rolling. Now, as I recall, it does not have to be an elected county executive. I think there are some counties, I know like in Fairfax, Virginia, the county executive has those authorities, but they're appointed. I think they're appointed by the council. I'm not sure how that's done. So having an elected executive is one of the options of separating. I think that makes sense in Maryland. That's how it's done in just about all the counties, number one. It's almost a rite of passage for a county to become an executive form. They have a group of just county executives that get together, and we have a wide range of them. There's some really remarkable people in local government, in small and large. Ike Leggett in Montgomery County is a very decent man and a very good man. You have Ken Allman in Howard County. He's a young man. Craig, he's former delegate who's now county executive of Harford County. Republican, very good man. I forget his last name. And in the past few years, we've had 2 county executives go to jail. So we have the whole range of, we prefer the good ones, but when you put a lot of power in the hands of one person, there's always the risk that you face that if it's the wrong person, things can go wrong. And that's why I would suggest to you that you be very careful how you separate the powers. And I think one of the things our federal government did at the beginning was to be sure that no one person accumulated so much power that they could truly overturn. I'm not even sure how to phrase it, but there was a strong sense of too much power in any one person's hands was a bad thing. And I would suggest that you follow that in giving authority to the county executive, his strongest power should be the administration of his office and the normal operation, day-to-day operation of the government. How you would divide the powers about land use and budgets, I think, are an open question. I would be very careful that no one person have total power of the purse, where once they get it, they can change it at will, that kind of thing, that there be checks and balances at every step of the way, that if you have an executive budget, that it has to go before the council, and that there be at least a majority vote, and that it pass. If it doesn't pass, you have to have a process where it has to be passed. You can't allow there not to be a budget. The state legislature's done that. Actually, the year before last they did. They ran out of time. The only one thing you have to do at this 90-day session is to pass the budget, and I think 2 years ago the state forgot that. But in the federal government, they haven't had a federal budget for a number of years now, and I just don't think you should allow that. There has to be a budget, and they have to come to terms. You have to be able to operate. And I think one of the things Maryland does that I agree is those if you're going to have a referral process where people can refer local laws to a public vote, which the state of Maryland has. I'm not sure single jurisdictions have them. That in Maryland, fiscal issues are off the table. You cannot bring a budget or a capital budget or bonds to a referendum. Once the legislature passes it, that's it. And I think you need definity in the finances. That is a critical part, and how the budget is done is very important. Those would be the general thoughts I would have. I think you can get a charter passed, depending on how you draft it and how you craft it is going to be critical to that. And the other thing I will tell you is that while there must be strong advocates for it. If you simply pass it and everybody walks away, people who don't want it will carry the day. It's very easy for people that are opposed something to win. The reason Code Home Rule passed is that the sitting commissioners took it upon themselves. We said we want this, we think it's a good idea, and we supported it. And it was a close vote. I mean, it was, I think, like 52 or 53% to 47 something, but it passed. And you have to explain to people what this is all about, and they need to understand, have a clear understanding of what this means. People are very protective of their rights to elect people. I mean, they like being able to elect people. And the more people they can elect, the more they like it. And it's very rare that you can get people to simply say, okay, we won't elect that person. It happened in Charles County with the Treasurer's Office. It was a major crisis that caused it to happen. And a little history lesson, and Leonard was here and was the state's attorney at the time, and he had part of the joy of straightening this thing out. We had a treasurer who was ill and essentially out of the office for over a year. She was sick, and the deputy and the treasurer's office was responsible for investing the county's excess funds, and there were rules in how to do it, and there was an audit every year, and they had to follow these rules, and the deputy did not. We all know what derivatives are and how dangerous they are. Well, this was 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and when derivatives were and the banks were selling this young man derivatives that they called the toxic, very bad. And
of course, they didn't call them that at the time.
Oh no! These were high interest rates, and these were winners, and those investments collapsed, and we had $10 million evaporate in a matter of days. And back then, our total budget was maybe $75 million, a lot of money, but this was like 10% of an annual budget. And we had to fix that, and as part of that process, there was a new treasurer, and slowly the treasurer's office came under the finance office, and it is no longer elected. I think most people probably don't even miss it or remember when we had an elected treasurer. So there are arguments about certain offices that are elected. Every 4 years, I think the judges recommend that there not be judges of the Orphans Court, that real attorneys be able to do that. And of course, everybody knows the judges of the Orphans Court and what have you, and they fight like heck, and they've been able to hold off the inevitable for a while. But eventually, as things get more and more complicated, these things have to be modernized, and those are the kinds of decisions you have to make. Sorry, I talked too long.
Not too long.
So those are my thoughts, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay. So our process now is we sort of gaze around the room and look for a hand here or there.
Seeing none, I want to thank you for the cookie. And,
well, I'll start then while other people gather their thoughts together. When we say that it takes good people to make the government work, the flip side of that is we try to design a government so that if the people are not ideal, it still works, and there's still checks and balances. So in terms of form, when we look at I'm gathering from what you said that you think that this may be the time that we should separate the executive and legislative functions.
I do if it's done in a way that doesn't let the executive run off with the whole show, and that there be checks and balances in case you have a problem with the executive. I mean, this train goes in two directions, and I think you want to be sure that the goal is to keep the government running no matter what the policy debates are, but at the same time, we've had experiences in the last few years where county executives have clearly misused their authorities and for their own benefit, and that's got to be guarded against at all levels and in all elected offices.
One of the things that we've talked about, and we've heard arguments both ways, and strong arguments both ways, is we currently have 5 people who are elected, 1 at large and 4 by residential district, but they run at large. And we've talked about, and we've had some of the county commissioners have come in and advocated that people run by district, and that is the only people who vote for you are people who are within your district. And we've had at least one county commissioner who argued that everyone should run at large. In terms of, do you have feelings about that one way or the other, and if so, why?
Indeed, I do. And this is not an uncommon discussion. When we went to Code Home Rule, we didn't appoint a charter board. We appointed a blue ribbon commission to deal with a series of issues that had come up every time there's an election, and generally raised by people who lost, and said, well, the system is not good and we should change it. But there was a consistency in the concerns, and one is the issue about at large or by district. The others were elected treasurer, elected sheriff, Code Home Rule. The only thing that group recommended was Code Home Rule, and that's what we went with. When you look at a county like Montgomery County that has 1 million people, and when they have a person elected by district, they could have 200,000 people in that. So there's a rule of what I call the rule of large numbers. After a certain point, it might not matter, although Montgomery County went back. They had, I think it was 7 by district. And what happens in a situation like that, I don't care how big the numbers are, is you get a group. So if you have, let's take Charles County, let's say we have 5 commissioners and they're all elected by districts. And let's say each district has 20% of the vote in it. Okay? 3 of those districts could have won by 50.1%, which means that would have been just over 10% of the vote in 3 districts. They won. So 30% of the electorate, follow the math here, elected a majority of the county commissioners, which means 3 people could run the government with 30% of the overall vote. And while it might not be 30, it might be 35, it might be 38. So you need to understand that you could have a divided government where a minority of the people elected that government. And that sounds more like a parliamentary system than it does a democracy of the United States. And so what Montgomery County did was they divided the baby. I think they have 3 at large and 4 by district. It's something like that. Or 4
no, they have a total of 9.
9, so it's 4 at large.
5 districts and 4 at large.
Okay, right. Thank you. I wasn't sure the exact number, but so they and the reason they did that is not just because they have large districts. I mean, so in our case, there's 60, 80,000 voters. So you're going to have 15,000 voters or so in a district. 10 to 15,000. That's not a lot of people, and it certainly makes it easier on the elected officials. But that shouldn't be the goal here. The goal should be you want a true representation of voters, and not just a small group of people to control this. So I have a real concern about just having districts. My favorite approach is everybody runs at large, and here's why. Doing it the way we do, the complaint was, well, everybody is from La Plata or everybody's from Waldorf, and this system spreads the commissioners out geographically. So there's 2 from Waldorf, 1 from La Plata and South, and 1 from the western side, and 1 from the northeastern side, and so it's spread geographically. So every area has a commissioner that would be familiar with that area. But when it comes time to a vote on where to put a school or a landfill, landfills are very popular, if you haven't noticed. Everybody wants a landfill near their house. And when you have to seat that, it's very easy to gang up with one of the 5 and you say, sorry, Joe, we never did care for you, so we're sticking it next to your house. And that's not how a landfill should be sited. When you know that it's going to be difficult. The way I describe it is you can have a front page story for a year that there's going to be a new landfill, and you won't hear anybody. You won't get an email. You won't get a phone call. Put the pin in the map, and all of a sudden you got 500 people in the audience screaming for your head, and you wonder, well, where were you? Well, it didn't impact them. And so those are the kind of decisions that are difficult to begin with, and when you have people just by district, it causes mischief, if you will. And also, we've seen instances where, even worse than that, a landfill, you take land use decisions. And suppose you have 5 districts and 3 of the members get together and they say, I'll tell you what, you make the zoning and land use decisions in your district, each of us will do it in our district, and we'll make that an agreement. We don't even have to pass a law on it. Just, Len, when you say you want this project or don't want it, we're going to vote with you. You do the same for me, and we do the same for Alice over here. Okay? Now, you may think that doesn't happen. I can assure you it does happen. And it's not a good thing. You want, when it's land use decisions, they're hard enough. You want people trying to do this for the right reason, even when they disagree, and there's lots of room for disagreement. But you don't want the wrong kind of incentives on these things. And that's why I think, especially a county our size, that having it by districts alone is a very bad idea. And I strongly urge against it. I think you will have a government that's responding to all of Charles County, is elected by all of Charles County, and they know it, as opposed to those who are not. And I just think we're not that large that we should put ourselves in that posture.
Well, one of the points that we've heard that favors the districts, voting by district, is that it's a democracy. Not only do we want everyone to vote, we want to have it open and attractive for people to enter into politics and to participate. And if we have smaller districts, it is easier. The bar for entry is lower, and it's easier and encourages more citizen participation because, as you said, if I want to run for something, I'll only have to appeal to 15 or 20,000 voters as opposed to 60 or 80,000. And that ties in with one other issue that we've heard that I'll also ask you to comment on, and that is with regard to opening it up so that there are more people who participate. What about term limits? So I'd like you to try to address both of those.
Okay. Well, it's easier to have a smaller district, and you can take that right down to 5 or 6 people, and where it's, your family makes it. Well, of course, in my case, if it was my family, I might not win, but if you can have it as small as you want. I really don't think that's the basis of how the election should be made. And let me throw in another situation, is gerrymandering. Now, I can tell you that the commissioners drew the lots for residency districts. You allow me to draw the lots for the election districts, and I can guarantee you I can get 4 out of the 5 people elected. Okay? I can make that pledge to you today, and I can go home and prove it on my little computer with just the precinct numbers.
That way on state level.
Right, and that's how they did it on the state level. And in 2000, the courts of Maryland threw out the redistricting
Right.
of the legislature because they had warned them about gerrymandering. And then Governor Glenn Denny, it was Glenn Denny, said, well, that doesn't apply to me. And he was punishing his enemies and rewarding his friends, and the courts threw it out. The courts redrew the lines. And a lot of people lost because of it. A lot of Democrats lost because of that. And I'm not saying that they should have lost, but there shouldn't have been. You don't want gerrymandering.
Can you tell me how many counties, I think there are 10 charter counties, how many of them have had lawsuits taking the city or county to the court because of gerrymandering of the 10?
I don't know.
I don't think any.
Okay.
I'm almost positive none have.
None have.
Yeah, as far as the courts,
Right.
as far as the courts stepping in with regard to gerrymandering, it is incredibly rare to do that. I mean, anyone who looked at the last redistricting in the state of Maryland, it was shocking.
I don't think that's.
It was.
I don't think that's a victory for the designs of districts at the county level. I just think the courts leave it alone. What happened in 2000 and 1990?
But you're saying from your presentation, you're saying that one of the bad things about,
Exactly. And it just because
about districts is gerrymandering.
Right.
Then
I
ask
say it
you-
can be.
And then I ask you to cite me an example of a county that's been accused of gerrymandering and it has gone to court.
Oh, no. You asked how many are going to court. How many have been accused of it? I guarantee you lots.
And gone to court.
Well, I don't know whether they've gone to court, and I doubt that there's been any decisions
Okay.
on it. But that doesn't mean that gerrymandering doesn't happen or that it's a good thing. It simply means that the courts tend not to intervene with that. What they did in Maryland is they warned Maryland in 1990 to stop doing. What they were doing is they were drawing out districts from Baltimore City. Baltimore City was losing population, and yet they kept redrawing these lines to have 55% of the district in Baltimore City and 45 outside of it, expanding the actual number of delegates and senators that came from Baltimore City. And so Baltimore City didn't mind it, the Democrats didn't mind it, but the courts minded it. The fact that these things don't get taken to court and aren't litigated doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And I'm just telling you.
But can you give me some examples of where it has happened?
No, I can't.
Well, then, I mean, you're trying to make an argument here, and you got no facts to support it. I guess that's my position. I mean, it's easy to say, well, don't go the district route because, oh my God,
Well, what I
it'll be
suggest
awful. But I'm just asking you to present some evidence, and I don't see any.
That's fair. What I
Right.
suggest for you to do is go look at the districts of your those areas that have Prince George's County has them. Look at their districts and tell me what you see.
Well, the thing is, I just looked at their charters. Of the 10 counties, 4 of them have districts only. Okay.
Can you tell me which one?
I can tell you that in a second. Only two, Talbot and Cecil, have at large. 2 out of the 10. So you got 4 with all district, and you got 4 that's split, where you have district and at large.
Right.
So I just don't see the problem. You made the accusation, but I don't see the evidence. I guess I'm saying, where's the beef?
Well,
I just don't see any.
Well, perhaps in gerrymandering, I haven't done the documentation, but I know elected officials, and I know how they draw the lines. And you have the county commission drawing the lines. They're going to draw districts that satisfy themselves. Now, that's just a fact of life. Now, whether that crosses the line of legality or not, I don't know. But I think there are lots of other reasons that I've cited for not having districts alone, including responsibility to the whole county and the possibility that a very small minority of people can run the county, and also they can have private agreements with themselves, absolutely subverting the true will of the majority of the people. And so that has nothing to do with gerrymandering.
Absolutely, but can you give me an example of where that has happened?
Prince
You know,
George's County.
well, okay, Prince George's County is one county out of 10.
Well, I know.
Tell me about the other 9. I mean, I'm getting tired of people beating up on Prince George County.
Well,
but,
I know
but
Prince
George
George's
County is
County-
just one county. Show me the other 9.
Well,
I can share one thing.
That's all I need, yeah.
In Baltimore County, what Murray was talking about, zoning powers. Baltimore County has a scenario going on right now where they have collectively, their council members have deferred local zoning issues to the person who's the council of that area. So there's a scenario where the state has invested 45, 50 million in a paratransit area and a redevelopment, positioned a community college here, invested money in traffic flows and all of this, and there is an industrial property that's been vacant for 2 or 3 years. No one in the county wants a Wegmans to go there, but this council person who represents this district. Well, because of the deal that the council members made a couple years ago in the back room, evidently, she gets her wish because she's acquiesced over the last couple years to other council people. So she's presented it, and so they've approved it, and it's against everything the state wants. It's against everything the rest of the county wants as far as development and smart growth and everything else. But yet now it's going to end up in courts, and the community groups are taking it to court because of this situation. So that's just a zoning scenario where I think he was trying to say where individual council people who represent a district have done their own thing, you know, like that, as opposed to it taking care of itself. And if the council voted it up 5-4, fine. If it voted it down 5-4, fine. Right. That's not the way they're doing it. They've made this deal, enough of them, to where if you want it and it's your district, then it goes forward.
Okay, let me make this suggestion. Murray has given us his reasons with regard to districts, and for better or worse, we've discussed it with him and challenged him on some of it. Okay.
I don't think I've changed his mind.
No, I just challenge you. That's all to support what you're saying. That's all.
That's fine.
Fair enough.
I think the second part of that, and I think we've exhausted that. So I'm just going to suggest that we talk about term limits for a minute, because that's another issue that we've talked about. Where are you with regard to term limits? And that would be for council people, for county exec.
I think almost uniformly county executives are limited to 2 terms, at least those that I know.
Okay, well, is that a good idea? More restrictive, less restrictive?
I think most elected officials have mixed emotions about it. I think citizens like it. I think citizens are frustrated sometimes that the system seems to be tilted towards the incumbent elected officials, which it automatically is, even if it's not done on purpose. The incumbents, I used to feel and still do that an incumbent generally loses rather than is defeated. If you do a good job and you keep your nose clean and you are listening to your constituents, you should be able to get reelected. And if you're working hard, I mean, there are times when the national scene would wash over, especially earlier on before Charles County grew so much. It was a balanced county between Democrat and Republican. When Bill Clinton was president, the off-year election in 2000 or whatever it was, 1988, I think it was, where he got washed out. The Democrats got clobbered in Congress. The Democrats in Charles County got clobbered too, got washed out. So you're subject to those kind of tidal waves, depending on the county you're in. I mean, I think this is probably more of a Democratic county now and less susceptible to that. But the other counties that are evenly distributed, that happens. But by and large, if you do a good job, you stay in touch with your citizens, you win. And so I think people get frustrated by that. I think there's two sides to the story. When, first of all, in 2 terms, very few people come to the office in a condition to really jump in with the right knowledge to be able to hit the ground running and really have an impact. And I was a county employee for 10 years, a department head of 2 different departments, and I was surprised. And I worked with county commissioners all the time, and I was stunned. It's just different when you sit in the chair. Now, I probably had a pretty good base of knowledge about the issues, but in terms of the speed of the issues and how fast you had to make a decision and how quickly and how important they were and how you couldn't walk into a grocery store. Sherry used to laugh. I'd send Murray for a can of coffee, and 3 hours later he'd show up. His tie's pulled to one side, his hair is mustache. I said, "What happened?" "Oh, I met some of the constituents." Well, what, geez. I mean, what? And it's true. Wherever you go, wherever you are in a restaurant, people come up to you, and you have to understand that. You can't simply say, "Leave me alone." You have to, "Good to see you," stand up, shake their hand, "Where are you from?" They had a problem, you write it down. I'll see that it gets taken care of on Monday. And that's the life. And if you don't want it, don't do it. And so the issues are very complicated. And I think local government is probably one of the most difficult places to go because you have to know all the issues. It's not like the state legislature where you're put on a committee. There's 6 committees, standing committees, and so one might handle health and education, and yours might be land use or transportation. So you have a wedge of the problem to start with, and then there's subcommittees. So you have a very narrow wedge. It's only committee chairmen and speakers of the House and committee chairs that really have to have a broader view. And so you can be a very effective person in a year or so if you pay attention and learn your craft. In county government, you have to understand budgets and finance. You have to understand land use. You have to understand constitutional law, that you're surrounded by lawyers telling you what you can and can't do. And you've got to have a concept of, what is okay and what is not. Engineering, it's not enough to say that, hot water's on the left, cold water's on the right. You've got to understand how sewage systems are run. With the environment today, it's very complex. You have to understand all of these total daily, maximum daily limits and all of this stuff which scientists do, and you have to make sense of it. And you don't have to be an expert, but you have to understand it. And that takes time. And by the time you're really hitting your stride, you may have one full term where you can do that. And so what happens in those situations is somebody's got to run the government. Well, it'll be the staff. Will become more and more powerful. Now, I don't have a problem with a powerful staff. I think they're very important. And I think they need to be powerful. They do have power. But it should not be more power than the elected officials. It's the elected officials that are supposed to set the direction of the ship. We're going over there. Now, you need to set the sails, and you all need to row, or you all need to do this. But that's where we need to go. And it takes time to learn that. Now, you burn out. I mean, after so many times, you just get stale. And so there is a limit. I mean, I think there should be a limit. If you ask me where to draw the line, I'm not sure. I think 8 is too little, and 20 is too much. St. Mary's has 3 terms for county council people, 12 years. That seems reasonable. For county executives, I might suggest the same thing. Although I think what happens with county executives is they tend to be county commissioners that challenge. I mean, you get plenty of people who have been in county government, so I don't think that 8 would be so bad for that, because if they paid attention, they've learned the trade and they know the business. And so I think you have a ready set group of people more than happy to replace the county executive. But for the first county council people, you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what their background is. The salaries are not set to, you have people who have no concept, and you have some people who would make great elected officials, but don't know how to get elected. And so you could say, well, we're going to pay $200,000 a year for these people. And it doesn't matter how much you pay. That does not necessarily result in who you get. And that's always been the difficulty in setting salaries for elected officials. You know, every elected official will tell you, well, I should make 6 times what I'm making now. I mean, I work all the time, I do all this, I do all that. That's not the standard. And the reason it's so hard to say, well, yeah, the job's worth a lot of money is because you don't know who. The review process is an election in November. In a normal private firm or even nonprofits or universities, they interview people. They know that that person has a PhD. They've done this. They've been in this business for 20 years. We have people references. You don't have any of that, and so it's very, very difficult to balance term limits with how much you pay them. You want people to be committed to the government. You want people to serve long enough to be effective, but you don't want them there so long that they think they own the seat's theirs, that they own it, and that happens. And so that's the best I can give you.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you think about the discounting the financial argument, the number of commissioners?
Well, let me describe it this way. Every time you add, if you have 3 people there, there's 3 possible, let's see, there was Nancy, Mack, and Murray. So Murray and Mack was one group, Murray and Nancy was one group, and Nancy and Mack were one group in terms of relationships. So there was only 3 relationships that had to work for everybody to get along. If Murray didn't get along with Mack, then 2 out of the 3 people were fussing. So if you want to now do that with 5 people, the number it is geographic. Exponential. And
Geometric.
yeah, right. My interpreter. And it becomes exponential, and then 7, and then 9. Try 141 delegates in the House of Delegates, or 435 congressmen, and we expect them all to get along. Please, they used to have sword fights and caning each other in the Congress, and so the more you have, the harder it is to have a coherent team. Not impossible, but it just gets harder. So I tend to like fewer. But to get to your point about, well, there's a lot of people who will run if they have the opportunity. They want 7 or 9 and more opportunities. The cost goes up a little bit, and I don't think cost is a real factor in it. But I think that's my main concern, that it gets harder to have coherence and closeness. But again, I think that it's sort of like inflation. The natural growth of it is it starts at 3, now it's at 5, then it'll go to 7, and then it'll go to 9.
Well, do you think it should stay at 5? That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I don't think we're that big a county that we need a bunch more people. I mean, and I'm not interested in making it easy on the now. When I was an elected official, I would have liked anything. I mean, you asked elected officials, wouldn't you like to be unopposed? Oh no, I like the elections. Oh really? Would you take a lie detector test and answer that? No, I would rather not be embarrassed in public. And every elected official prefers to have no opposition, and prefers that it be easier. After your first election, it does become more and more of a distraction, almost, to elected officials. Well, I'm so busy running the government, how can I possibly have time to run for office? Well, that's the beginning of the end, when you take that attitude. So I would stick with 5. I'd like to see some, perhaps, when we get to a certain population, maybe 200,000, we would add 2 more, something like that, where there's a rationale behind it, just as opposed to some people want it. What's a good number that Maryland has? What are the numbers in Maryland and what's the population per council person. I know it's vastly different between Montgomery but there are counties our size or near our size. And, what do they do? And maybe you'll get some.
Well, I can tell you. There's, of the 10, 3 of them have 5 members. That's Howard, Cecil, and Talbot. 5 of them have 7 members. And 1 and 2 have 9 members. Montgomery and PG have 9 members.
Who has the 7?
7 is Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, Frederick, Hartford, and Wycomico.
Wycomico is the only small one in that group. All of those are either our size or larger. And Anne Arundel, Howard are larger. I forget the other ones you said.
Wycomico, Hartford, Baltimore County, and Anne Arundel County.
Hartford and Anne Arundel, I think Hartford is about, we're similar sizes.
Right.
But Wycomico is a small county. I think it's the only one smaller than us. So, you can get what you want out of those numbers. Some have 5, some have 7.
Okay, let me get Craig.
That's fine.
Mary, I just want to go back to the previous form of government, and I think you referred to when we went to Code Home Rule. And I think at that time that commission recommended what they did, in part because there was a lot of concern that what the county had to do or what it wished to do had to be vetted by Annapolis or had to be approved by the state legislature. And by going to Code Home Rule, it gave a little bit more of a self-determination, self-rule to the county. And I know you served, as I recall, you served at least a full term under each of the form of government, the old commissioner room, full of government, the Code Home Rule. In your experience, in your recollections, were there any issues, even after the change of government, that the county, that you felt that as commissioners you weren't able to address? That needed, that would need a change of government, or should be written into this charter that we're looking at to try to give the commissioners more control over the destiny of the county.
Yeah, I don't remember the full list, but absolutely. The one that jumps to mind is whether you have a charter or Code Home Rule, you're not allowed to create new taxes. You're allowed to raise the old ones, but you're not allowed to say, in addition to a property tax, we're going to have a tax on energy. All those and all the jurisdictions have to be passed in Annapolis. So, and that's a big lump of the complaint. We have a program. We need to try to finance it. You can do fees up to a point if they're the kind of thing, because there is a constitutional difference between a fee and a tax. And everybody says it looks like a duck, it sounds like a duck. No, it ain't a duck. A tax ain't a fee. And so if you do things like pick up the trash, you can have fees for them. Although when they put in, and we had, I don't know if we had Code Home at the time when they required us to do recycling. We were putting in a recycling program when we realized we didn't have the right to levy a tax. Because we didn't want to charge it just for people that used it. We wanted everybody to pay for it and hoping that they would use it. And we wanted to put it on everybody's property tax, that recycling cost, and we were going to have curbside, and so we had to go to Annapolis for that. Anyway, Tom, you want to, at least, I think in Code Home Rule you have the right to code and charter to change the form of government. But Charles County had a specific law in Annapolis about the sheriff's office. Yeah. And I don't know whether Code Home Rule or charter would there's some legal issues here you've got to look at. And like in most charter counties, they've had the authority whether to have an elected sheriff. Well, you have an elected sheriff, but they're not necessarily the police department. Right. You have to have a sheriff's who does the security and servicing of papers for the courts. But if you have a police department in charter, they seem to be able to choose if they want a police chief appointed by the county government. And so you'd have to answer that question. There are a series of things. I don't remember them. Gene Lauer came up with a list of those. Most of it had to do with things like where we gain power. I mean, it's stuff that most people thought we had anyway. Control of barking dogs. We'd have to go to Annapolis to change that. Noise abatement in communities. Keeping your property clean. It won. Code Home Rule lost in the rural counties and was voted on and passed in the more urbanized areas, which should be pretty plain to people. Why? Because it was the urban areas where we had things that needed to be dealt with. HOAs and their ability to maintain homeowners associations and their ability to maintain certain infrastructure. And how did you do that? And all kinds of urban issues that were arising because we were urbanizing. And so, and I don't recall, we never got to the point of looking at charter, what kind of powers they're given. And I suspect, if anything, it would be a little more than Code Home Rule, but that should be all in the Constitution of what you can and can't do. And then you've got to decide how to divide the powers given to the government. Then you have to decide which branch of the government gets it.
Well, let me maybe be a little bit more specific as well. I think we've heard from Commissioner Kelly, Commissioner Davis, and Mr. Lauer about particularly what seemed to be about shortcomings with the county's budget process. That under the current form of government, that it's difficult to form and adopt a budget. And I wonder, certainly with I think you served 4 terms as commissioner president. You have as much experience with that as anybody.
I don't feel that. I mean, we adopted one every year, with all 5 of us working on it.
So you didn't feel that there was any structural deficiency in the county government?
You weren't allowed to create new taxes. You could raise tax. I mean, there was plenty of taxing authority. I mean, we never got to the limit of income tax. We never got to the limit of property tax. There is no limit on property taxes. But you have to be careful, because Prince George's County now has a tax cap. It's been in there for 20 or 25 years and been rejected. Overturning it has been rejected 4 or 5 times at the polls. People won't give it back to them. And that's a fact. And Maryland now has to pick up some of the cost of school construction in Prince George's County because the county doesn't have the money. They're limited strictly by a tax cap passed by a citizens' revolt. That was back when California was doing these things, and it was the vogue, and it stuck. And it has stuck in Prince George's County. And there has been some talk about the state government ruling them illegal, and no delegate or senator in Prince George's County is going to slit their own throat on that one. I mean, it is consistently rejected. The local governments go up there and say, can't you pass a law and get us off the hook here? And the state says, look, your people voted on it. We're not going to save you from yourselves. And so there should be moderation in taxes and make the sale and things of that nature. But in terms of passing a budget, there were times when the state, during the recession of 1990, they were cutting. They couldn't get ahead of the falling revenues, and every month we were getting another cut. But that had to do with an economic problem and not a innate problem with county governments and their ability to pass a budget. I don't buy that argument at all. People don't want to sit line by line. When I was a commissioner, everybody, if you didn't want to sit in the room, don't sit in the room, but don't complain about the budget, because nobody put it together, but the staff would come in with all the requests and the revenue estimates. And it was our job to balance it.
One of the specific recommendations that Mr. Lauer made was regarding debt affordability, that the county currently has a policy regarding debt affordability, but there's no law that necessarily restricts the county regarding debt affordability. And he suggested writing it into the charter. Would that be your recommendation?
It depends on how you do it. Yeah. But incidentally, they follow that policy, and they're below the.
Well, I understand. I think
Yeah.
Mr. Collins said it very well earlier that you were
you're never going to be able to set a series of rules to deal with everything that's going to show up in the future. It's like a contract. When you have a contract with a big company, the day after the contract signed, an issue comes up that you didn't think about. And the same is true of a county budget. And there's things we don't even know we're going to have to do in the future that are going to be put on the county governments by the state and federal government. There are going to be things that we do now that become antiquated. We no longer, the way libraries are done or the way technology and how it's changing the government. And so you can put reasonable and should put reasonable controls in there. And debt affordability is one of them. Maryland has it. It's in the law, and Maryland's done a pretty good job on it. In recent years, they've been a little less precise, in my opinion. And I think they have worked their way around it. And they bankrupted the Transportation Authority rather than float bonds to build I-95 and the cross-county the inter-county connector. They put over $1 billion and some dollars in the Transportation Authority. They used to have no debt. Now the toll fees are going up everywhere because the state didn't want to, do it the right way.
Right. I would gather from your remarks regarding Prince George's County's limit on taxes that that's something that you view unfavorably.
No, we've raised taxes before, and I don't think a strict limit. It is unlikely that you'll be able to guess what's going to happen in the future to make that precise decision.
But in terms of Craig's point about debt affordability, if there's a right way to do it as opposed to a wrong way, can you give us an idea what the right way is?
Yeah.
And also what the wrong way is?
Okay, yeah, the federal government's actually starting to do this, and they now have, only we do it in capital, they're doing it on their total budget. The federal government doesn't have a capital budget. And I had this discussion with Senator Sarbanes, who's a PhD economist who went to a great school of economics, and he said, well, we don't have a capital budget. I said, get one. He said, no, we don't need one. I said, you do need one. Capital budgets are for purchases that have a 15 or 20-year lifespan, like roads. And the problem the federal government has now is the operating programs and the entitlements have drawn all the money out to where they're not keeping up with infrastructure. I mean, everybody's crying about infrastructure. The problem that has happened is they have one big pot of money, and it's being sucked dry by entitlements. Now that I'm on Social Security, I'm strongly in favor of that program. and suggest they not change it. I don't care how many roads they want to build. And that's how it happens. And now, and so they're caught in this. And I think you need a capital budget. And I think the way to do it is you limit it to the debt service, interest and principal, not just interest, but interest and principal, you limit to a percent of the overall general fund operating revenues. And Charles County, it's 8%. That means all the debt of all the bonds, all the general obligation bonds, must not exceed 8% of the county budget. So the county budget's around $300 million. You should not have more than $24 million in any given year of debt service. And you can run your bond ladders to avoid that. And the other thing I would insist that they do that they're starting to screw with because they're getting lazy is 15-year bonds, not 20-year bonds, not 25-year bonds, 15-year bonds. Maryland has that. We implemented that when I was first elected, and I was there long enough to see we financed the total road project based on 3 years of bonds that we're going to retire. And so a quick payout takes more. It means you can do less projects up front, but when you look at it over a 30-year period, you can do. I did the math one time. I think you wind up with 60% more projects overall doing a 15-year bond than a 30-year bond. And because look at it this way, in a 15-year bond, you pay more, but at the end of the 15 years, they're all paid off. You start over. So if you have $20 million worth of 30-year bonds, they're not paid until 30 years from now. 15 years of $30 million, you get 30 plus 30 is 60. Now, it's not double because the cost is more, but it's like 60% more. So if you can find an elected official willing to think 30 years in advance, this is the best buy. But you won't find an elected official who thinks past the next election. So put it in there, 15 years. That's a good one.
You recommended to put that in the charter?
In the charter. Now, the exception might be there are other kinds of bonds other than general obligation bonds. There are bonds, there are revenue bonds. I would say revenue bonds based on any revenue. Well, I'm not sure about revenue bonds. Those are the sewer bonds and other bonds. They tend to be double-barreled. If they're a GO bond, if they're backed up with a GO promise, it should clearly be.
What's
You double barrel them. So we say, okay, we need to expand the sewer treatment plant. So we need to borrow $20 million. So we borrow $20 million worth of bonds, and we say this is going to be paid for by the fees we collect as part of the operation of the sewer system. So people will pay their fees, and we'll pay for this out of that. But should that fail, should, for whatever reason, that revenue not be enough, we will pay the remaining principal and interest out of the general obligation. And that's why you want it part of, you can float those bonds, but that piece, if you put a 15-year thing in there, that's going to limit the value of doing that, but it still will be a good thing. What it's supposed to do is guarantee that the bonds get repaid.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we take a 5-minute break and then see if there's anybody here who understood everything that Murray just told us.
I might get away scot-free on this one.
I'm not quite there on it yet, and I will just remind everybody that I was at budget hearings when Murray was there, and one of the staff members who's still there but can remain nameless, I'll name him. I understand that when fiscal services would get ready for the budgets, they would have Dave Eichholz play the role of Murray Levy and grill everybody before they went in for the sessions. And you can get an idea of how line by line it was, because I remember Murray challenging me about one of the secretary's salaries one time. So he certainly, as we can see right now, in terms of finances, I think if we have any questions, we ought to try to ask Murray as many questions about finances as we can while we've got him here.
Can I make a different suggestion?
Okay.
Why don't you put together a little subcommittee that will report back to you with people like Gene Lauer and people who have done the finances of the county to come up with some recommendations to you, and in writing, and then explain them.
We can talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, because it's going to be hard to get it done in 5 minutes, and it's very complicated. But given time to think about it, there are going to be other things we can come up with that will make good sense, and that other governments have, and it's intended, and the federal government is thinking of doing these kinds of things. And once you put it in the charter, then it can only be changed by vote of the public.
Well, that's something that we'll think about during the 5-minute break.
All right, good.
Okay.
That'll be easy.
Let's
to
take
try and
5.
understand this stuff.
You're going to stay, though, right?
Well, I was going to try to sneak out, but at least I'll have another cookie.
Okay.
I got to say,
He's doing.
Well, what happened here is a double barrel is essentially it's designed to guarantee that the bond will be paid. So what they're saying is, and I think
it's a general obligation.
it is fee first.
I actually think that's a pretty good suggestion of
That
coming up
Is that a
with
barrel?
4 or 5
The second barrel is right, the double barrel.
The barrel
The first barrel is
specifically
paid out of the fees,
of
and the second barrel,
percentages
shotgun, is
that you
that
would-
be able to be
that
paid out of the general
makes
obligation.
sense from a fiscal
You don't want
policy
that
to write
on
in,
the GO bonds either.
and just let them bring it back to us.
That's the thing,
Yeah,
is
general
none of
obligation.
us,
bonds
Just let 'em
paid
bring it
out
back
of
to
the
us.
general
Are you saying that
certainly can't hurt
should
anyone has
No.
those
it's much more extremely honest
I
with
think
current
we should.
politicians.
I'm trying to think what we did. I know
He has nothing to do with
early on, we had
Same with
30.
Dante had my vote.
After you're
He did.
You're out. You're out.
You weren't serious about that vote.
You don't have to worry
Yeah,
about it.
because if
I'd
I
have
don't
to
read
see
have
the
any
actual-
You had to keep your drugs. You wanted to pick between the two of the pages.
I had it highlighted. I can't remember. If I got another good, I have to read it all over again.
We got to get where you have them.
Harry Grimmelmeyer had his hip surgery.
Yeah.
I tell him
Yeah, I had a.
I have been
Yesterday, yeah.
overspread my
area.
so
I had to.
I took the blame for
According to doctors, everything.
I could. I mean, I understand.
Yeah,
what
I kind
happened.
of got the sense of that when I was reading the minutes. Everyone was just kind of like,
Yeah, totally.
Because this is a very
That was a nice showing you had.
Yeah. And so usually you get a range of
It was very good.
These charters you want to be as. Do you want to get?
No, that's all right. I'm good. I mean, mine's more about APS, so go ahead and
Put it
stay.
out there, some counties tell
I mean, I know what my answer is. I know what the answer is, but I
you
want
get what you deserve.
the group to hear about it.
Well, I guess we have them for the evening. And
I'll stay here as long as you will.
And before we move on to other subjects, why don't we see if we can exhaust any questions we have about the financial end of things?
Murray, could you just explain a little bit about the different types of bonds and the constraints on the different types? I think I understand general obligation bonds, but
Yeah,
there are
you
a lot
have.
of other things.
There's a series of different forms in the IRS, bonds that are tax exempt, bonds that are not tax exempt, and counties and states can do both. The non-exempt bonds tend to be more exotic things like building, helping a mall get started, things like that don't fall into the strict definition of county things. We ran into that when we were planning for the natural gas-fired power plant in St. Charles. This had to be 10 or more years ago, where we were working. It was a company in Europe just before the Enron crisis wiped all that stuff off the thing, and they were asking for county bonds to deal with roads in and out and things, and we did it, but they were not tax exempt. They went off at like 5 or 6% compared to a 3 or 4% of a tax deferred. So you're allowed to do they're all defined in law. You're allowed to do those. The hospital, right? And these are quasi governmental things, and so we did what, $15 million in the hospital? Is it 15? Yeah, and so that just and they tend to be I think they're non-recourse. Is that right? The tax. Yeah, some of this stuff they can't come back on the counties. I forget, but there's a whole series of that. And then you have the kind of taxes of bonds within the government depend on the source of money to pay them back. A GO bond is just that, a general obligation bond, and what it says is the county will pledge the full faith and credit, not just the general fund. We will tax whoever we have to tax to pay these bonds back. So when you float a GO bond and the revenue runs out in the county, you have to raise more revenue. You have to pay those bonds. And so that is the safest bond, and there have been very few defaults, and that's why they're so highly rated.
And that is when you say the safest for the investor.
For the investor.
For the investor,
Yeah.
right. I'm sorry. Yes, the safest for the investor, and the reason, and Mark and I had the discussion, and the reason you want debt affordability limits in there is that's one of the things that the rating agencies look at when they rate every county, and that's how we ultimately got to it. We would go up there every year, and we'd be told by the rating agencies, is this back in the 1980s and 90s, well, your hospital's too small, so we expand the hospital. Well, you don't have a mall. We get a mall. And we said, well, you don't have. And finally, we asked all three of them, Fitch included, can you please tell us what you really look at for us to become a AA bond? We were A+, And what was driving me crazy is the real determiner of how safe these bonds are the people that buy them and what interest they're willing to take. And we consistently had a AAA rated bond in the marketplace. Our interest rates were always low and at what the AAA states and counties were getting. And I'm thinking, the people that are lending this money have more faith in us than the rating agencies do. And so we got this Fitch book, and it was like the 15 habits of very good financially run counties. And we went down that list and ticked every one of those things off. Some of it we didn't have, which was a debt affordability standard, and we put in a debt affordability standard. And so things like that are important for people looking at the bonds and the interest rates, and that's why I think it's so important that you have a firm one in there. And I know it's 8% for GO bonds, but it could be a little more complicated than that, and I don't want to just throw a number out or a thing out. I would have to go back and review all that stuff to do it correctly. But there should be debt affordability and control standards, in my opinion, in the charter.
And what is the matter? What is wrong with the way Prince George's County went about trying to limit their government, the government spending or their government revenue?
They evidently, well, this happened years back.
Right.
I mean, this was a long time ago, and I really can't tell you other than they were raising taxes every year, and it was a citizens' revolt, and they put a tax cap, and it tends to be on both the income tax and the property tax, is my understanding. Now, I'm far from an expert on these things, and it limits the ability of the county to raise the rates on people based on if you have a 3% growth rate and you have more housing. Then the rate can go up, but the same rate has to be charged to everybody. You can't raise that but 1 or 2% a year. It's a very strict limit, and they've refused to undo it. And what it does is it ties the county's hands, particularly in a time like today when you have a downturn of the economy and a falling of the property values. I mean, this has been a very strange and difficult 4 or 5 years for both federal, state, and local governments. And the state governments have done a better job of getting through this, although the federal government's done quite a bit. I mean, more than I think people realize. They haven't done some of the big stuff, but they've knocked out about $2 trillion worth of future debt, and so they're on the right path. And I think as the governments heal themselves, but some of this stuff took, and the arguments by the economists are that there's a place for more spending on infrastructure and things like that of a high economic value that will generate jobs and actually increase the economy of a country or a county or a state, and transportation systems. Internet system, laying the infrastructure for internets and things like that. They have high economic values. They create jobs, and there's a big body of economists who believe that what Europe did wrong was they slammed the brakes on and drove all the countries into deeper recession. And when that happens, your deficit actually grows. Your revenue shrinks, and you actually lose ground. It was a hard concept, myself included, to believe, but that's what happened in Europe, in this country. Austerity, but the flip side of the coin is they better know when to start putting the brakes on, and that's the second part. That's Act 2 of the drama. We haven't seen that one yet, and we'll see if they get through that one. So it's a dangerous times, and governments need to have abilities to deal with these things, and those are the kind of things that you want to be careful not to legislate against.
Van, I think you had a question.
Yeah, somewhat switching gears, Murray. Board education and school construction is a big ticket for counties like Charles County, where they're growing, have been growing, building schools every year. The price of schools continues to go up. The county The county has a APFO, as you know, that we dealt with, adequate public facility ordinance. How do you see what we did collectively 10 or 12 years ago being worked through charter versus code, for example? I mean, do you see any
I don't
positives or any changes that?
I don't think the current debate going on is going to fix the problem, regardless of the level or form of government. I think there's a lot of data that I've been reviewing that has some very interesting numbers that I think have been totally ignored by everybody. And I think the rate of growth of pupils has taken a fairly dramatic bend downwards. And we call it pupil yield per house. And over the last, let me give you a number. Well, let me ask you a question. From 2003 to 2012, in 2003, the number of students in our entire system was 26,318. That was as of, and every September 30th, the county does an inventory. They count heads and of students, and that's the official amount of students for that fiscal year, and that's how the state pays the county money for school students is on a per capita basis. So in September of 2003, the count was 26,318. How much you think that went up? How many new students do you think we had over the last 10 years? How many say 2,000? How many say more than that?
I'm going to say more than that.
Okay. How many say less than that?
I don't know.
2. Not 2,000. 2.
Per household.
26,320 students as of the count in September of 2010.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is it a shifting of population or what?
Well, that is a very important question. And what has happened is it's not a flat line. It almost looks like a perfect curve. And I haven't run all the numbers. I just came across these numbers. I got this book, and I got copies of all the numbers. I like numbers. I mean, I can play with them all the time. And there was a page that had school enrollment over the last 10 years, and there was a page for occupancy permits granted over the last 10 years. And I said, well, I added up the occupancy permits. There were 8,600 new houses built and occupied between 2003 and 2012. 8,600, which means that according to the per pupil yield that we use, there should be 4,300 new students in the schools. We use a 0.48 divided between elementary, middle, and high. I won't get into the math. Everybody will start nodding off. But using the formula that the county has, that would indicate there should be 4,600 new students because we have 8,600 new houses. We have 2 new students. Now, either somebody is kidnapping our children or they just didn't show up, which is my bet. They didn't show up, which changes the whole calculus of how you plan for new schools and how you consider, are the schools overcrowded and why. And so what has happened is it climbed for 5 years and then settled back for 5 years. So it's going something like this. Now, you can say, well, the middle point was the recession and maybe that had something to do with it. Okay. I don't know. The recession had to deal with the speed of housing units. I mean, yeah, the housing units slowed down, but the per pupil yield out of those houses, why would they slow down? I mean, so you build half the houses you get half the kids. You don't get zero or minus. Actually, the rate for middle school was a minus number. And so, yeah.
So they're now building St. Charles High School. So then how do we justify building St. Charles High School if there's this lack of pupils?
Would you like to serve on that committee? They could use somebody who would ask that question.
Well, Murray, if there was a peak, was the peak in 2008, what was the number that year? And are those kids, do we now have more kids shifting into high school and fewer kids in grade school? Is that the deal?
No, what is happening is more kids in kindergarten, fewer yet in middle school, and fewer yet in high school. And what seems to be happening, certainly from middle school to high school, is as the high school kids are graduating, they're not coming in the other end. So it seems like there's a wave going on starting now. So I asked a friend of mine who is on the committee and is in the real estate, is a developer, and he suggested that the reason the elementary numbers have gone up is during this period they implemented pre-kindergarten. So they added another grade in there of a certain number of students, and that's going to account for a big part of the increase. And so what I'm suggesting to them is, because there are hundreds of millions of dollars of investments at risk, get a demographer. There are people who do this for a living. Let us not guess. I just discovered that in the last 3 days. And my eyes just popped up open. It's like, and the debate has been our schools are overcrowded.
Yep.
Well, the enrollment's been going down for 5 years. And really, when you look at, after you build the high school, the middle schools as a group was not overcrowded. I mean, individual schools are, but
It might be overcrowded where
in certain areas. Right.
and not in others where
The
where
rural-
growth wants to be, they're already full. Perhaps.
Well, the argument that growth in the outer areas is going to cost more infrastructure, those are where all the empty schools are. Even though there's been growth, some growth in the rural areas. And what I fear might be happening is the kind of things that has hit Montgomery and larger schools is you not only have a shrinking population, you have a moving population. So while you may have less students, that they may be congregated in a smaller area. So how do you deal with that? Well, you close down old schools. Now, who would like to be on the school board, if you followed any of this stuff, that would say, oh, we're not going to redistrict, we're just shutting down 3 schools?
But they just redistricted.
They did.
Yeah.
Right, and we're building a new high school. We are. And there's a plan for a new elementary school. There is. It's in the 2018 budget.
So Murray,
So, Van.
because I think this would be interesting, because at the very first meeting or two, there were some folks that asked questions about both the Sheriff's Department budget and Board of Education budgets and relationship and whatever. How do you see the possibility of charter government affecting the budget of, say, the Board of Education and school construction?
I would, I want to see more data. I would require the county executive to be responsible for saying that all the data in these kinds of decisions are made. You might do something like that. He's the county executive or she's the county executive. It's their job to see that the government is run efficiently. Part of efficient government is spending the money wisely. And spending the money wisely depends on projections and running, for instance, I've been meeting with some of the staff people, and I said, long-range projections do not give you a good absolute number. Like you can, however new students you use as a variable. If you say, well, we're going to grow at 200 students a year, you get one speed of development. But what I wanted to do is to look at comparing state-rated capacity with a broader capacity. We call it core capacity. The schools have been built with the ability to be overcrowded. And the reason is because they've always been overcrowded. Nobody has ever stayed within state rated capacity. It's too expensive. So when you build a school for 1,600 kids, it can really handle 2,000 kids. Yeah, you have some trailers, but the way you design the building is there's enough bathrooms, there's enough classroom space, there's enough, the hallways are wide enough, there's enough land to put the trailers on. And so when you go to state rated capacity, you lose all that capacity. What's the cost? If you want to do it, fair enough. But there's going to be a big number attached to that. What's that number? You can generate that. That is easily generated based on knowing how many kids will be allowed, what the state capacity rules are, and the monies you have coming in. You can generate how much additional capital money you will have to spend to do the state rated capacity. That should be done.
So as a former president of May4, which is Maryland Association of Counties, you dealt with all 23 jurisdictions. Is there any county exec that has that ability under their charter?
I don't know. I don't know whether it's under their charter. Yeah, there's some very good county execs who do just that kind of stuff. And they're very good council people.
Right, no, I know
Right.
that. But I mean,
I've known some very good county executives.
you think that that we could structure some things within the charter possibly that could add some teeth to the direction of the county exec?
Yeah, I would do it in the direction. It's how they make, what decision they make, I think, is a policy issue. And they may very well come to the decision that it's worth the money to have state-rated capacity. They'll need to defend that against people who want less taxes and spending less money. But, maybe that's what you want to do. Excuse me. You should be basing that on numbers and real data, so that when you make the decision, it's not, we want state-rated capacity, oh my God, we didn't know this was going to happen. You need to try to project as to what impact these decisions are going to have to make. There's another thing called developer rights and responsibility agreements, where a developer, when they say, well, the school's overcrowded, you can't build, we will pay $15,000 a house. That means $30,000 a kid, because a house is supposed to generate a half to allow us to build. This is a gift from heaven. This is a gift that will keep on giving. I knew immediately there's a body of people who say you shouldn't be doing this. When you run the numbers, they are staggeringly clear that this is a good program. They have to shape it differently. They have to form it differently. And what drives me crazy is it's not that the decisions they're making them blind. And these are expensive decisions. And so I would require some level of expertise has to be applied to this stuff. And if the elected officials can't do it or don't want to do it, they should be demanded to provide proof and data on the decisions they're making. Then when they make them, fair enough, because there are policy decisions here, but you have to know what the costs are, and they don't. And how you would work that into a charter, I don't know, but I recommend it highly, because I think it is a fatal flaw in a government that doesn't do it.
Everything you said, I'm going to accept it at face value, but how we work that in, how we get people to do that, I don't understand. I don't know where to begin. I don't know if anyone here has any idea. Where would you begin to? Can you give us some idea of how you would work that into a charter? And before we get, just as an aside on the factual data here, 2003 it was 26,000. 2013 it was 26,000. It's been coming down for the last 5 years. So what was it in 2007 or 2008?
It went up. I have those numbers. I can't recall them off.
Okay.
So
my concern is maybe it was going up, and people said, school population is going up. 2008, we said, we're going to need a high school. We better get. I assume from the idea of, hey, we need a new high school to opening is probably 5
no.
years.
By the time they funded the high school in 2010 or 2011, and by then it was clear that something had changed. Okay, you had 2 or 3 years where it was bending.
Okay.
Okay, and so, did they make a mistake on the high school? I don't think so, because they're already 800 or 900 students over capacity, and so building that new high school will not be a disaster. You may wind up with excess capacity, and it may not, looking back 2020 and looking ahead 5 years, if those numbers continue to decline, it will not be looked upon as one of the most brilliant decisions ever made, even though it's defensible, very defensible right now. And so that chip is played.
Okay.
All right.
But how do we write into a charter something about how someone performs their job?
I have not an idea. You asked me what I wanted. I'm trying to lay it out for you. I thought you were the pinball wizard on how to do the law.
Well, I think the problem is we've got to go back to what's his name, Tavala, his presentation to us, and he said, "Be very careful. All you're doing is creating a structure of government. You got to be very leery about trying to legislate through the charter." And this is what I'm seeing happening. By some, even the statement you made about make the bonds 15 years. I mean, we've got professionals that can do that. We shouldn't. Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but it seems to me that we got to be careful about legislating through the charter. That's my point.
That's another point we have to consider.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that, and I'm not trying to set decision making through the charter, and that has to be left to the elected officials and the Board of Education. What I'm saying is that they shouldn't be allowed to shoot blindly.
Right.
And how to do it, I really don't know. Maybe it's not possible.
But they should be allowed to shoot blindly now, right? Under the current government.
We're blinded now. Well, they have the data. They're just not applying it as of yet.
Well,
now, they will say.
We'll write it in. They have to be smart.
With all due respect, Murray, if we can write a charter that gets governments to stop shooting blindly, we've got a real future.
Just
here.
Oh, God, we jumped right on that one.
We may take the show on the road if you can do that.
And then we apply it to the state. And
Well,
then the federal.
and maybe what I'm asking for is, not possible, and I will accept that. But that's your decision.
And if
to
I
make.
could, just in closing, the reason I went down that way is because when we present a charter, which is what we're charged to do, people are going to want to know what are the benefits to the charter. Education and education construction is the driver of our budget and has been the driver for 20 years and will continue for the next 20. That is, I think, something to where people are going to want to know if you're not going to change anything and you can't do anything with it, then I'm okay with where it is.
Right.
And so that's why I went down that road to see.
Well, you just happen to hit the right nerve, the right nerve. and so
3 days ago, that answer would have been different.
well, it would have been. It would have been.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Levy, first of all, I thank you for being here this evening. I think I missed you when you first came in. Just a couple of quick questions. One of the benefits, supposedly, from going from commissioner to the present code is that we would be able to enact more local laws, i.e., the number of laws that the legislature has to deal with should decrease. Did you, in fact, see that, number one? And number two is, do you think that there's going to be much of a difference in the legislative load coming from the county to the legislature between code and charter? Or it's going to be just about the same, do you think? And my second question, so I can get it out of the way now, is, and you touched on this earlier, but the sheriff department, I'd just like to try to get another perspective on this. We've been told that somewhere in the annotated codes of Maryland, there's a requirement that, not a requirement, but there's some provision that either says Charles County must have a sheriff or can't have a police department.
Can't have a police.
Can't have a police. Can you give us a little bit of the history of that and how that came about and who presented it? And
I think it was the FOP that went there. They were under, there was a law in there also that the FOP would be paid on the pay scale of the state police. And in the years where the state police get raises, they are very adamant about following that law. when the state police doesn't get increases, they want relief from that law and want pay increases. So these are very rational people who want more money, and as we all do. But it's not the job of elected officials to be unreasonable with the money of the citizens. So I think that was part of the, it was the FOP and people who wanted an elected sheriff. It politicizes the office. Every 4 years you have an election and they choose up sides. It can, there's people like having an elected sheriff. I mean, they like the sheriff being answerable to them for their decisions. But there's a downside. There's a side of it that's not quite so pretty, and that's when the elections come up and how officers, higher level officers are picked, tend to do with campaigning and supporting of sheriffs or not supporting of sheriffs. So there's a very large political dimension there. Not that there isn't politics in every organization, and wouldn't be if the county government appointed them. They would be the politicians making the decision and dealing with things. But I think it removes it one layer, and as it gets bigger and bigger, you find situations where we are confronted with it. The teachers union wants more money. The FOP wants more money. Elections coming up, and by the way, if you don't give us more money, we're not going to support you, to put it bluntly. And all of us have to face that. And so you don't want to be anti-law. You don't want to be law enforcement. You don't want to be anti-education. You want those programs to proceed, and you want our children to do better. But there's an issue there. There's an issue there that politicians are making some of these decisions not based on what's good for the sheriff's department or the citizens or what's good for the children. It's what's good for your election. And there's always some of that. I think that that's become a problem. And I had the support of both of them. And I knew how important it was and wanted that. But at the same time, I had a responsibility to be responsible. And we worked through these things. But it's difficult. And looking from the outside in now, if I was an elected official, I probably wouldn't to be honest, I probably wouldn't make this recommendation. It's nice having the political leverage that you have when it comes to those things. On the other hand, I'm buying that with taxpayer money. And so I think it's something that has to be considered. And I think this board needs to consider that. And I think Maryland, and it's not just Maryland and it's not just Charles County. When you look at what's happening around the nation with government unions and how they're holding governments, let's say they're holding them accountable for their salaries. And there's a group of people, and these are people that are not left, right, or right or left. They want the school. They're trying to improve the school systems, and especially in our inner cities, and are trying to move our school systems forward. We have to do better. We spend a ton of money on education. We have to get better outcomes for our students, and so there's a whole movement now looking at how to do this. And one of the issues is how do you deal with the teachers in a fair way that gives them good salaries and what have you, but holds them somewhat accountable for the kids. At the end of the day, the outcome that we need to have happen is how are our students doing? We could give them $1 million apiece. It doesn't matter if our students are not doing well. And when you look at how the students are doing, there's a lot of them that are not doing well. And so those children need help, and necessarily giving a salary increase to a teacher doesn't automatically equate to that happening. And so this issue is being driven more by what's happening to the students than by what it's happening to the teachers. And so there has to be a balance. And I don't think you can have a good system without good teachers. But we have to get a balance in there where they understand that who they're really accountable to is the parents of those children and the children themselves. And when and if there is a teacher, and I have the same complaint with the medical profession, that if there's a bad doctor, they're very hesitant to, they just push them along to someplace else. And with teachers, it's very hard for them to admit that there's a teacher in a room that's not doing a good job. They're friends, they're in the same union together and what have you, but that teacher is destroying 25 children for a year. And that is a far bigger problem than one person is. And there's no question that the quality of the teacher is a critical thing. So how do you do all this? Well, I think how you do it is you get these kinds of questions up on the table. And there is no silver bullet. There is no way that somebody's going to wave a wand and say, oh, here's how you do it, and everybody will be happy. No, teachers will never be happy if you tell them you limit their ability to get more salaries. Why would they be? Why would any rational person say, oh, okay, maybe Bill Gates wouldn't mind, but the rest of us would mind? And so these are tough issues, but if you're going to do a charter, now's a great time to look at them and have a public debate over these things. And these are issues that I think deserve to be on the table.
Okay, just to follow up on that, what could we put in a charter, or what are you suggesting we should put on the charter with regard to those concerns?
I think in terms of a sheriff's office, you should look at giving some authority, and again, you have to check that state law, to give some authority to local government to have both a sheriff's department and a police department.
Okay.
Let them fight it over. They may not want to do it.
Okay. What about the schools?
Those are that issue, I think, is out of the hands of local government because it's in state law that they have that union and state law. And so I don't think a charter is going to be able to deal with that issue. That's at the state level.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. There are a couple loose ends that I just wanted to touch on that we've heard other people talk to us about. And two of them come to mind for me, and I'm sure others here will think of other ones that we've heard about. We've heard about having a charter where the public approves it in 2014, it goes into effect 2014. Or the charter could say it goes into effect in 2016 or 2018. And so that's one issue, if you have a feeling one way or the other with regard to that. And then the second issue, we've heard pros and cons with regard to whether, if you have a council, I don't know whether you would call him the president of the council, whether someone would run as president of the council, or there would be 5 people who would run for the council. 5 people would get elected, and the 5 would pick among themselves who should be the chairman or the president. You have feelings on either of those or both?
The first one again, real quickly.
Oh,
come on, just
I forgot to.
Transition.
The transition, right? The
Thank you.
transition. Yeah. Look, trying to do the implementation of a charter and explaining a convoluted process about what will happen if it's passed makes it harder to understand the charter. It will be a very complicated thing. Where we will have a person who's running for president, but if they are elected, then they will become the county executive, and then we will have somebody. We'll have to appoint somebody who fills in that chair. And by the way, we're going to do it. And my belief is that if people don't understand it, they vote no. Mm-hmm. They'll vote. Unless you can tell me why to do this, I'm voting no. Mm-hmm. So the burden of proof is going to be on the proponents. And the more you complicate this thing, the harder it's going to be to get people to understand it and agree to it. So I would keep it as simple as possible, which means I would suggest at a minimum you make it 2016 a 2-year term, and that doesn't count towards your
2014 a 2-year.
No,
I'm sorry. Yeah, 2016.
You have it in 2016. It'll be a 2-year term. It doesn't count towards your limitations of 2 or 3 terms. Mm-hmm. This is a special time. After that, in 2018, it's a 4-year term, and we're off to the races. At least that gives a close timeline where it is implemented. People will understand how that operates, and people will be running for the right offices. And there's reasons not to do that. There's reasons to do it in 2018. But, as a minimum, I would not try to stack this sandwich this tall and expect people to understand what's in it. And so I think that just makes it very complicated. Not that it won't pass. It passed in Cecil County. They're still having fights over what happened there. And as I understand what the lady did, she was elected. She was made the county executive. She then resigned from the Republican Party and became an independent because she didn't want the Republican Central Committee to make the appointment because they were going to appoint somebody that was going to tip the balance of the yada yada. And it was like, my God, aren't the people happy they did this? And so, to be avoided at all costs.
And that second issue, that is, with regard to the person who would be the chairman or the president of the council.
I served under both ways when it was the tradition was the top vote getter was the chairman. In our case, it was Mac Middleton, who is a superb elected official, one of the nicest people you'll ever work with, and was a great president of the county commissioners, and everybody was very happy with that. After that, you ran for it, and in 1994, when Code Home Rule was passed and all that, you had to run for it. And so that's when they went to 5 districts, and that was passed in Annapolis, and it was the system. The system we have is the same system that St. Mary's County has, with the exception of we don't have term limits. So they have a residency district, but elected at large. That's where that concept came from. And so I was the first one who ran for it, and you're elected. It's like everything else. The reasons to have somebody elected, it gives them, in the case of the county commissioners, you got no authority as president. I mean, I think the only authority is you sign documents and you chair the meetings. Other than that, I mean, the only power you get is what the other 4 will give you, and you only get that if they trust you. With leaving out anything else, that may or may not work. And with the case of, and it'll be the same case even with the county executive, you'll have a president. Other groups, they have it, where they have it, it rotates. I think there's something to be said for that. I think there's something to be said against it. If you have a person who really would be a good president and serve over time and get to be able to work with people, what a really good president would do is to be a facilitator and to facilitate the communications between the county council and themselves and the county council and the county executive. You are not going to be able to craft a government that doesn't run better if that happens. And nor should you. You should encourage that. You should encourage a government where people are encouraged to cooperate. The more eyes that look at it, the more people that are involved with the decision, the less likely it'll be a bad one or a corrupt one. And I think people know that in their hearts and souls. We can't always articulate it. So, I really think it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. I would prefer an elected president. It bestows on the position a little more anticipated authority. It doesn't give any. If you're going to have something where you might want to consider some authority to the president, but again, it's not unlike a legislature. It is a legislature. It will become a legislature, and not a legislature and an executive branch. And legislatures adopt their own leaders, and I wouldn't limit it to a 1-year thing. Let them adopt their own leader and say it can be as long as they want. Now that I'm thinking about it, so.
Okay. Just to try to clarify, the choices are elected, chosen, and
Well, he's reading himself out.
Well, rotating is up to them, or I guess you could put it in the charter. If you're going to have a let them choose it, then let them choose it.
and then subject to change at will.
At will.
will.
It just happened in the Republican Party at the state legislature. They changed minority leaders.
Okay.
And they were not happy, For whatever, they didn't say why, they just said, a majority of the Republicans said we're not happy, and they made a change in it. And when you think about it, they ought to be able to do that.
Any other issues that we ought to try to ask Mr. Levy to illuminate for us?
I'm not sure I illuminated or fogged it up, but may I just compliment you all? You have been asked to do an incredibly difficult job, which took our founding fathers years to get right. Years. There was an article of Confederation first where they screwed it up, and then had to have a constitutional conference, which took all summer. And we're still changing it. So cut yourself some slack. Spend the time you need. You've got a lot of time. When do you have to have it ready?
August.
This August?
No, 2014.
Okay, so you've got time. Although it's got to be voted on, so you want as much. I would. The more time you can have it debated in public, or have public hearings and have it discussed in public, the better. But these are very complex issues, and when you get to finance and how to build schools and all this stuff, it gets very complicated. And I would not just simply gloss that over. I would have some, it doesn't have to be this board itself, but have some experts in on the financing of local governments. The rating agencies and people that do this. Sam Ketterman, who is the county's finance officer, about, what does the rating agencies look at? What should be in this to, in writing? Can you give us some documentation about how other counties do this and how they control their expenditures and how they control their capital programs and their bonds, which is a very important thing to do. And there's all kinds of ways to do it and do it well.
Ms. Levy, now that you are a voting citizen, and you will be voting on this charter as well, because you live in Charles County, what are the top 3 things you would like to see in the charter?
I would like to see checks and balances, reasonable balances, so that no one person can run off with the railroad. And I know that's difficult, and you don't want to paralyze people, and it's a balancing act. But I'd like to know that the county executive will be held to account by the state legislature, and yet they cannot turn him or her into a helpless, hopeless person. And so, and part of that authority is going to be how you do the budget, how you give financial authority to people, which is a critical issue. So that's going to be important. How you lay out for me, the finances and how you control them is going to be a critical issue. And I guess the third one is going to be land use and land use planning, how you deal with that. Deal with it it's a policy decision, but at the same time, I don't want it divided up in a way that is unhealthy by the county legislature. I want to be sure that it's done with a view towards all the people. I want the farmers to feel as represented as downtown Waldorf. I want everybody to feel that they're represented in this game and in this game together, and I think those are the 3 things I would look for.
We've actually heard some talk, some possibilities with regard to land use and checks and balances. Currently, how would you suggest, if we have a county exec and we have a council, in terms of how people get appointed to, I assume there will be a zoning commission.
You've got to have, I think 66B requires...
the land use article.
The land use article requires everybody, right, it's changed. It's the land use article, requires all counties to have a planning commission.
So how do we put people, what would be your idea of checks and balances for getting people on that?
Other people with the county executive and a legislature, or a governor and a legislature. The governor will make recommendations, and it'll be approved by the Senate. We won't have a Senate, so the county executive would make a recommendation, and it has to, for it to be turned down, you might say it takes, if you have 7 people, it might have, depending on the number of people you have, like
Should
with
be
5 people, majority is 60%.
Supermajority.
Yeah, or some kind of supermajority, or can he send up 2? Does he have to send up 1 or 2? But I would have an executive recommendation and a legislature approval process. I think that tends to be standard SOP, and that would be in keeping with just about all the, I don't know if the charter governments do, but I know state governments are like that. I know Maryland's like that, so that seems pretty reasonable to me.
And I thank you very much.
My pleasure. Good luck to you all.
Thank you.